What are you afraid of? I was in my last year of high school, working on an article for the school's less than mediocre newspaper that no one read. An aspiring journalist, how original. I smile at my naivety then. It was mid-October, and I was supposed to write a piece for the Halloween issue. I was free to do what I wanted with it, even if that meant shitting out a purely fictional story of how I heard some strange noises in the woods while hanging out with my friends at some senior bonfire. But I decided that wasn't the right option for me. I was a real journalist. The wind was blowing through the trees peacefully, creating a false sense of calm that day in Hodgenville, a small Kentucky town that barely registered on a map. I had scored an interview with one of the mental health patients at Hardy Memorial Hospital in Elizabethtown. I was given strict instructions before being allowed into her room. 1. I wasn't supposed to bring anything in that she might use to harm herself or me. Basic. 2. I was absolutely not permitted to open the doors or windows. A little strange, I thought, but fine. Finally, I was never, ever supposed to ask her what she was afraid of. They warned me very sternly about this, but being young and stupid, I brushed it off as a basic instruction for interviewing crazy people. The room was dark and humid. The window was covered with a sheet. The only light in the room came from a small wall fixture near the bed. She sat on the edge of the bed, facing an empty chair I assumed had been put there for me. I turned to thank the orderly and walked across the room as the door clicked shut behind me. "Hello, Nancy," I began pleasantly. "I'm here to ask you a few questions. Is it all right if I get started?" Her cold eyes just stared. I took my place in the chair, pulled my tape recorder out of my bag, and clicked it on to record. "Can you start by telling me your name?" "Nancy Miller." I thought I detected a hint of fear in her raspy voice, but brushed it off. "Can you tell me why you're here?" No response. "Nancy, can you tell me why you're here, please?" She hesitated for a few seconds before lowering her head and whispering, "I hurt them." "Who did you hurt?" "Lulu and Josie." "And who are Lulu and Josie, Nancy?" She began rocking back and forth, her eyes fixated on the ceiling. "My cats." She giggled at this, a small, childish giggle. I held my expression, careful to avoid flinching or gasping. "When did this happen?" 12 days ago. I drowned them in the kitchen sink." Can you tell me why you did that?" She glanced inquisitively at a spot somewhere behind me and cocked her head to the side. "Because he wanted me to do it. He wants me to hurt lots of things, lots of people, but I can't because I'm stuck in this room. I keep it dark for him. He likes the dark." Suddenly I was aware of the reason I was not supposed to open the doors or windows. "Who is he, Nancy?" Still rocking back and forth, her pace quickened. She whimpered and shook her head. "No, I'm afraid." The orders I had been given never crossed my mind. "What are you afraid of?" I felt a change in the air as soon as the words left my lips. It felt still, silent and too still. The life drained from the air like someone had pulled a plug. It was just still. Very slowly, Nancy's smile turned into a horrified grimace, and then again into a twisted grin. A horrified, twisted grin. She began shaking with what looked like laughter, but no sound came from her mouth. Then she went still. The emotion drained from her face until she looked lifeless. Almost. Then I heard it. It started as a low hum, a very faint guttural sound emitting from the pit of her stomach, travelling up to the base of her throat. and erupting from her mouth in a feral, growling scream. It didn't even sound human. The doors flew open and several staff rushed in, quickly sedating her and ushering me out. I was ordered to leave the hospital immediately. Several days later, I was typing the story on my computer, trying to make sense of what had happened. I was the only student in the school at this hour, my only company, the janitor. My head began to throb, so I took a break from the paper and walked over to the small cooler we kept in the paper's office. I reached for a can of Coke, only to find that they were all warm. Not just warm, but hot. I checked that the cooler was plugged in, and it was. Strange, I thought, but it's probably just broken. Piece of shit. I started to walk back to my computer when I heard something. A loud thud in the hallway. I ran out to see what it was, and was greeted by Gus, the janitor, lying motionless on the floor. I ran to his side and rolled him over. His face was pale and had a blue tint, and as soon as I'd rolled him over, water poured out of his mouth and nose. I screamed and ran toward the nearest exit. Something wasn't right about the air. It felt too heavy, and the harder I ran, the harder it got to breathe. Was it raining inside? Ignoring the insanity I was suddenly wrapped up in, I decided to focus on getting the hell out of it. I kept running towards the door, any door, feeling my lungs fill with moisture. I coughed and spluttered, and even retched a few times. I reached the door and stopped dead in my tracks. Staring back at me was this horrified, twisted grin, shaking with soundless laughter. I started to turn round, but then she was behind me. "What are you afraid of?" Her voice was distorted and awful. I screamed and turned back to run for the door and burst outside. I bolted for my mum's van and hauled ass for home. The next few weeks were tense and terrifying, until I saw the news report. Local mental health patient killed in collision. Apparently that night at the school, she had chased me into the traffic and was struck by a semi whose driver was overworked and exhausted. I still couldn't shake the feeling of darkness that seemed to still cover the town, so I convinced my mother to move a few towns over to Radcliffe. I gave up journalism. To this day, water makes me nervous, and I can't stand a hot, humid, dark room. The images I saw that night will always be with me. That is what I am afraid of.